welcome to Low-sal-life. My name is Sarah, and if you're new here, we talk about salicylates in food. And I am salicylate sensitive, as most of my viewers are. There are other types of chemical sensitivities like amines and sulfites that a lot of people tend to have as well. So far, I'm pretty fortunate. I have only identified salicylates and folic acid are my two big triggers for allergy type reactions, and they might range between skin problems, headaches, migraines, stomach problems, respiratory issues, even anaphylaxis. I've had a few salicylate related moments, scary moments. So anyway, it's kind of a big deal. But today I'm feeling feisty, and I want to talk about some of those low foods that have been traditionally on the low list for, 40 years or so, and they've been moved up to higher lists. And other foods that have tested high are still on low lists if used in small amounts. And so I want to get to the bottom of this, and this isn't like going to be a hole-in-one argument one on my end. It just isn't. This really, the best way to test for foods that you're sensitive to or not is with an elimination diet. You don't eat the foods, you introduce them. If you react, over a day to a week of eating that introduced food, take that food out and don't come back to it for a while. That's really the gold standard for figuring out what you're sensitive to. But there are lots of tests that have tested food, salicylate levels and that kind of thing over the last 40 years. In the last probably 5 years, there's been a significant amount of them. And there's another thing, you can watch any of my videos, which lists to pick. The first one, part 1, talks a lot about why there's variation in food. And so one of the things I like to bring up is that these tests might vary by just the food itself. Like cabbage, I think, has 400 varieties of cabbage. That's a lot. And so, one green cabbage to another green cabbage might be completely different. Growing conditions vary. They can vary by the country you're in, right? So I've noticed that the European tests are a lot lower, have lower results than the Australian results. And unfortunately, there aren't any from the US that I've noticed. So I usually follow the Australian ones more closely because they've been doing it longer, and I think that our food system's probably pretty similar. I know Europe has some stricter standards. So I want to talk about food servings. I use lemon and lime and small amounts of garlic and even small amounts of onions, and I may include them, or they may have been included in other recipes that are considered low salicylate. And I want to talk about how much is in a dose. So most of the studies I'm using are going to be Malakar et al. Or Kezika et al. Those ones include both free salicylic acid and bound salicylic acid levels, which vary from former studies which only tested free salicylic acid. Both of those were done in 2017, and they also included way better technology, so I feel like those tend to be a little bit more reliable. They've also bumped some negligible or low foods up into higher categories, but again, it's all about dose. And I've converted them all so they're all using the same standard. So if you look at the original research, the numbers might vary a little bit, but I've converted them so all the levels we're talking about is in milligrams per kilogram. That's what more of the modern studies use, and that's different than Swain's. I think they used milligram per gram, I believe. So anyway, it's just a little bit different. We are all talking about the same amounts, it's just different units of measurement. So that's what I've changed when reporting these numbers. And you can check out my list that I have. It's done off of actual food results. So this isn't how people react to them. That's kind of different, right? But these are actual scientists that test actual food and report actual numbers. That's how my list is organized. I don't work with patients, I only work with myself, so that's the reason why the list is organized that way. Okay, so now that we've gotten most of that out of the way, let's talk about doses. And just for some context, like most of the stuff that I eat is on the low or negligible list, and I don't eat a lot off the medium list. There's a few things that we're going to talk about, like leeks and cabbage. Those are, according to Malakar, with the free plus bound salicylic acid levels. Those used to be in the low category. They've now moved up to the high category. I can eat a small amount of leeks when I cook, and I also can eat a very, very small portion of cabbage or sauerkraut, but I react to them almost always. So one of my biggest reactions for cabbage is some stomach pain, but I almost always get nightmares like clockwork, just crazy nightmares, some insomnia. And that's just what my really low dose of salicylate, like you've pushed it a little too far. I used to suffer from night terrors for years, like debilitating, both as a child and as an adult. So nightmares are one of the first things I notice, and with cabbage I get that, which means that cabbage is too high for me. I decided that I would use cabbage as kind of like my upper threshold for the amount that I could tolerate. Now, another food that I eat all the time is chayote, and that one I just introduced. I don't have any issues with that. It's a little unfortunate for this video that I'm going to talk about it because I don't have a free and bound salicylate level, but you know, so I can't use that as a standard. But Swain did test it in 1985 and it did test negligible. So we'll be talking about the level of chayote, and you can kind of see when all is said and done, I can kind of get a range for what is too much for me. So let's start with cabbage. So cabbage really varies. Most of the studies in the past have been at 0 milligrams per kilogram. Those tests only tested free salicylic acid, and it's generally very well tolerated by most people on a low salicylate diet. However, in 2017, it was tested by two different scientists. One was Cashews et al. In Poland, and one was Malakar et al. In Australia. Cashews tested a little bit higher at 0.057, which is negligible still. And Malakar et al. Tested it much higher at 2.55 milligrams per kilogram. You know, that's all fine and dandy. It's got a level, okay, whatever. Now, I would normally eat a large portion of cabbage if I were to cook it. So I decided, you know, to slice off a section and to weigh it and then see exactly how many salicylates I could be getting from this. So I would normally eat like maybe 1/6 of a head. This portion that I sliced off is probably about 1.5 cups of cabbage. Like if I chopped it down really small, maybe 2 cups at the most, but we're looking at weight, not volume. So this is 183 grams of cabbage. It's a little bit old, maybe a little dehydrated too. I've had this one in my fridge for about a month. I don't eat it very often, so that's just something to think about. If it was fresh, it might be a little bit heavier. According to the science results, if I did if I did the math, I would have a range between 0.0104 for a portion of cabbage up to 0.4665. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the range is. So if, let's say that my cabbage is on the high end, and I'm using Malakar's free and bound because maybe my body reacts to bound salicylates more actively than maybe another person might, that means that I'm getting 0.4 milligrams during a dose of cabbage, right? So to me, anything over that 0.4 might be a little bit on the high side, and we're going to look at some other things. So like I said, the chayote, this one here only, it doesn't have any bound salicylic acid results for it, so that's not ideal to compare it to this, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what the low end could be for me for a full vegetable that I don't react to. So I measured this chayote. This one was actually quite large. It was 427 grams. I always peel my chayote, and then sometimes there's a seed in the middle, sometimes it's spongy, sometimes there's a seed. So in that case, I scoop out the middle part and don't use that either. So I'm gonna drop this down to just an estimated 400 grams, just for easy math. So for this one, you know, it's 0.1 milligrams per kilogram. So if I eat the whole chayote, I should be getting only 0.04 milligrams per kilogram. So that's pretty good for that whole serving of chayote. So that's quite negligible. Oh, here's another one. Leeks have changed into the medium category if you include the free and bound. Most people aren't going to eat a ton of leeks, right? And so I would normally have like a handful of leeks. I freeze mine, and then just, you know, I slice mine up, freeze them, and then I'll use like a handful with like a steak, or maybe add it to a soup or something like that. So with the free plus bound salicylic levels, they tested at 4.1 milligrams per kilogram. They used to be 0.8 back in the day, and the amount that I would get from a handful of leeks is 0.12. Now I really wouldn't do too much more than that, but that just kind of gives you an idea of what a handful of leeks might look like. So let's look at some more controversial ones. So now let's look at cashews, because this one here, I can tolerate like 1 to 2 tablespoons of this. Anything more and my hiney and stomach is definitely affected. So I always measure these out. I never just dip into a bag of cashews and start munching on them. They used to be really low, 0.7 with Swain 1985, but with Malachar testing both free and bound, they have increased into the very high category. So their new level is 41 milligrams per kilogram. So that's very, very high. Almonds are at 47. So maybe not the best food to eat, but in low doses, it might be okay. So the picture here I'm showing you is for 3 tablespoons, and that weighed out at 34 grams. So that amount ended up being 1.39. So if you compare that to cabbage, it was no wonder that I react to it. You know, if I were to get the cashew that had the highest amount, I could certainly have a fairly significant reaction to that. On the low end, and if I say, you know, 2 heaping tablespoons, let's say it's 21 grams, then you're coming back down under that 1 threshold for a serving for myself. So that could range anywhere between 0.0147 if you're using Swain's numbers, all the way up to 0.863. So 0.863 seems like it's kind of high. And like I said, I can usually tolerate it, but it could be anywhere. It can vary widely. But let's look at lemons and garlic. So I think it's interesting that ARPA lists garlic as low in small quantities, but they've taken lemon and lime out of the low category and have moved them up into the very high category. Now, ARPA also does not separate salicylates from amines in their book, which is also unfortunate. It just doesn't distinguish. So when I look at that, I want to ask more questions. So garlic can vary widely. They've had several tests besides Malachar and Swain. There was Malachar tested at 17.05 milligrams per kilogram, which is quite high. There was another scientist that tested it at 56 milligrams per kilogram, which is super, super, super high. And then Swain tested it at 1 milligram per kilogram. Again, that's only free salicylic acid. So it can vary quite a bit. But if you eat a whole bulb, if you're using Malachar's amount, the 17, it could be 0.85, right? Garlic doesn't weigh a ton. So this is done by weight. If you use the 56 milligrams per kilogram, which is super, super, super high, then 1 bulb could be 2.8 milligrams. Now, that would just make me super, super sick. But I don't eat a whole bulb of garlic at one sitting. I might eat like 1 clove or maybe 2 cloves. I make a ranch dressing that has 1 clove of garlic, and it covers the entire pizza that I share with my husband, and it takes me 2 days to eat through. And then I also have half of that dressing left over. So if I ate all all of half of the dressing amount, I would eat half a clove of garlic in the whole thing. So just kind of something to think about. So if I ate 2 cloves of garlic, which weighs 6 grams, I would be getting a dose between 0.10 and 0.33. So still a little bit on the high side, but still lower than a full serving of cabbage. I'm just saying. Just something to think about. Just want that to sink in. Okay, let's talk about lemon. So 1 full lemon. Unfortunately, these tests don't say lemon with rind or lemon fruit peeled or anything like that. So I just weighed the whole lemon. 1 lemon is almost 100 grams. If I were to eat the whole lemon, according to Malacar's results, Malacar tested lemon at 6.74, so that included free and bound. And then Swain had tested it at 1.8. So, you know, they bumped up significantly. 1 lemon at 99 grams would have 0.66 milligrams of salicylic acid in it. But we don't eat a whole lemon. I will say when I found out lemons were okay, I did eat a few lemon bars one time. And by the time I got to like the 3rd or the 4th lemon bar through like this event, it was like dinner time, I was at an event, and there was like literally nothing I could eat, and I had not packed a lunch, and so it was really frustrating. So I ate a couple of lemon bars throughout the day, and yeah, turns out that yeah, if you eat too many, it's definitely going to affect you. But if you eat 1, you're probably going to be okay. So let's look at, I took the lemon, I cut it into quarters, and then I squeezed out quarter lemon. So if I have a shot of gin and I put in like 2 or 3 drops of lemon juice or lime juice, it doesn't affect me, right? So this is way more than I would ever put into like a serving of gin. This might be about how much I put over like a whole salmon that I cook and I split with my husband, and there's leftovers for tomorrow, right? So a quarter of a lemon squeezed out into like a little shot glass so you guys can see how much juice I got out of it. That weighed 5 grams. And so 5 grams of lemon by the highest standard showed up at 0.03, which is great. That is lower than my entire Chayote, which I don't react to. So I just kind of wanted to throw this out there so that you guys could kind of have a little bit more power and a little bit more flavor. We'll look at other things like fresh basil leaves in the future. Those should be okay by what I was looking in the results. If you are curious about how I did the math on this, I actually did make a calculator, and this isn't, like I said, this is just a tool for you to get some perspective. This isn't like you should be counting salicylate levels like you would calories. Like, I don't think that that's like the best idea, especially since there's so much variation. Until we have like 40 different tests on cabbage instead of 4, it's really not a great way to do it. But if you want to think about like, oh, I'd really like to put like, you know, a quarter of a mango in my fake chili, you know, salsa or something like that, you kind of have an idea what you can tolerate and not tolerate, this might be a tool you might be interested in. So I put that tool under the Living Life section on Low-sal-life, and it's called the Salicylate Calculator. It's just an Excel sheet. There's an example of how to use it. You can put in all you need to know is the value of the food, and you can choose between the lowest to the highest value, and then you can put in the quantity, and then you get an idea. And like I said, everybody's going to be different. This is just a tool for perspective, but it's just kind of a fun exercise. I do want to say lime has never been tested, so that one could still be very well tolerated by many, and even if it has the same levels as lemon, it's probably going to be okay. Now, if you react to citrus, I know some people have a limonene allergy, and some people just can't tolerate citric acid. So in that case, don't touch those. So yeah, everybody's different, but just throwing out some perspective out there today. And I think that's all I've got. As always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Low-sal-life. I'm always looking for more recipes to add to our recipe collection, so please contact me through the contact page or through Instagram, Facebook, and submit your recipes. And I would love pictures with them. So just some thoughts, and I will see you next week. Bye.